Hey guys, Pete here with a brand new segment for this channel. Today we're going to be talking about tear down and cleaning of your knives. Today I have in front of me my Benchmade Griptilian, who is in desperate need of some repair. I've been working on the farm a lot lately, and there's dirt and grime and bits of potato in the action, and it is just horrible. The poor girl has been put through a lot lately, and could really use a good cleaning, so I'm going to show you guys that today. But more importantly, this is not just a show of how to fix or repair or clean your Benchmade Griptilian. There are practices here that I hope will carry over to pretty much any knife that you have to fix, as well as just general equipment that will carry over to pretty much anything you have to fix as well. So it will be nice to have a video like this just so you can get used to what it's going to be like when you start getting into your knives, regardless of what they are. So first things first, let me start off with what kind of equipment you're going to be needing. As you can see on the table, I've got some blue Loctite. I've got the two Torx bits that I'm going to be needing. In this case, it's a T6 and a T8, which are fairly standard, but obviously have a nice wide variety of Torx bits just so you can handle anything you come across. I also have some Q-tips, which are my preferred method for cleaning. Cotton swabs also work great, as well as just, paper towels or what have you. I just like Q-tips because they're really good at getting into little tight cracks and crevices, and the Griptilian has quite a few of those, so it's very handy for that. Off screen, I also have a can of WD-40, which is my current lubricant. Yes, I know, before you start saying this is not the best option for lubricating your knife pivots, it does work, however, and it works just fine for me. Yes, there are better options out there. There's Blue Lube and tons of other stuff, but I don't care. The WD-40 works fine, and it's cheap, and it's what I have on hand, so it's what I'm going to be using. I also have some 91% isopropyl alcohol, which is one of my preferred things for cleaning. You can just use water. It's just, inherently I don't like getting water inside of my knife's action in case I forget to dry it. You do risk rust and damage to your blade. But so long as you're sure you completely dry out the knife afterwards, it's not the end of the world if you use water. And then for some serious tough grime or, grease or whatever you happen to have on there you need to get off, things like Gooby Gun or Goo Off do work very well. I remember I got some roofing tar on my Kershaw Leak and some Goof Off rather. Took that right off with basically no issue. So for tougher grime, use a bit stronger cleaner. Just be careful that if you have something like a plastic liner, you do risk kind of eating away at it. Other bits and pieces that are optional, not really necessary. Some kind of tray to hold all of the various bits and screws that you might take off. I have a magnet off to the side here, a very strong little hard drive magnet. Though interestingly enough, the screws on the Griptilian are, it's not that they're not magnetic, it's that they're practically not magnetic, which is kind of a pain in the ass. I'm not sure if it's just a stainless that isn't very magnetic or what, but alas, it does not hold. But I have it here anyway because it holds kind of sort of well enough. Additionally, I have some blue painter's tape, which I'm going to use just for edge safety. Again, not necessary, but is nice. Just something to wrap on the edge of the blade here, just to protect you in case the knife happens to, close or fold on your hand or anything. It is very good for that. Again, not necessary, but nice to have. That's pretty much all the main things you're going to need for this. So without further ado, let's get into it. So as you may or may not know on the Griptilian, you have a couple of body screws here. You've got one here, one more on the other side, and then you've got three smaller screws here, here, and here. And it's important to note that this guy back here is actually behind the pocket clip, so this will have to come off. This is the deep carry pocket clip, and it's been too long since I've had the standard one on here. I'm not sure if with the normal pocket clip you can access that without taking it off. I'm assuming you can, but obviously I can't, so be it. Real quick note on the Torx bits. So I have basically the cheapest set that I could find. I do not recommend that you do that, but you can. It is certainly an option. It is certainly valid. It's what I've done here, and it's fine. It will get the job done. That being said, it is important to note that you do risk stripping your screws, or even if you really start cheaping out, you risk stripping the actual bit itself, especially on these tiny Torx bits. I've never had that happen, but I know that it can, and unfortunately that is, what happens. You get what you pay for. And real quick, these body screws here and here are larger, different sizes than the other three along the way, so you will want to separate them, but they're not so similar that you can't tell them apart. So it's really not the end of the world if you separate them because you can just visually inspect and tell where they go. Another thing to note is that all of these body screws were in fact Loctited from the factory, which is excellent. Good job, Benchmade. I don't know if I'll be Loctiting in all of them. just because I haven't really had an issue with it. Because these are body screws, you can torque on them fairly well, and it's not a kind of action where that will hinder it at all. I know in the leak, if you tighten it down too much, you'll have some trouble with the action, but that is not the case here. So, you know, you can kind of crank on them. Just be careful you don't strip anything, of course. But that being said, I don't think I will. Doesn't mean you shouldn't, it just means it's not 100% necessary. I've never had any issues with them coming off. Now again, because I have this deep carry pocket clip, I'm going to have to remove it first before I can get to that last screw. Same deal as before, same T6 screws though. I am going to do something a little bit differently, which is I'm not going to take the individual screws out. I'm going to take them out with the pocket clip. It just makes things a little bit easier later and keeps the screws all in one place. Again, not 100% necessary, but just a little tip or trick to make things go a little bit smoother for you later on in the assembly. So that comes off, and we're down to a bare naked little Griptilian here, sorry to see. And with that last screw, you can feel the two scales start opening up on you. Now, we still have that pivot screw to take care of, and I'm intentionally leaving that for last. Real quick, just show you guys, on this side here, you've got the other side of the pivot that does not have a screw face, and over here you do have a screw. I'm going to remove, first to get a swap bits, this is the T8. I'm going to remove the pivot screw, but I'm going to keep it nearby for a handy little trick I'll show you guys in a moment. There we go. As you can see, much larger than the others, very noticeable. Now, this is what the inside of your Griptilian is going to look like. You have these basically liners, you've got your Omega spring as it's called, and you've got your axis lock, the bar itself. This is the pivot that comes up all the way through the knife. The reason why I told you to keep this screw handy is because this can be a bit of a pain to push through. Very tight tolerances, very good fit. And when it is pushed all the way down as far as I can, so that's flush with this top liner, it hasn't protruded far enough out the other side, see if you can see that, it hasn't protruded far enough out of this side for me to just grab it with my fingernails and pull it through. Now, you could just take your screwdriver, push it in there, and push it through, but you do risk damaging your threads. It's not a huge risk, but it is there. So what I like to do is take my pivot screw that I just took out, there we go, and screw it back in. Not much, whoops, can be a bit of a pain at times, put this down on the table, and just screw it back in ever so slightly. It doesn't have to be tight, it's literally just to get in the threads and make sure that you're not going to damage them. Seem to be having a bit of trouble today. There we go. Now, what this allows me to do is just push it through and then unscrew it again. Just protects your threads from any, undue damage, because you really want to be careful, because if you damage the pivot, it's kind of a big issue. If you mess up one of the body screws, alright, so be it. But if you damage the pivot, you're in a lot of trouble. So now I have the entire internal mechanism apart, got the blade, the two liners, the washers, everything's ready to go. Now, this is normally as far as I will take it. You can take these liners apart. I choose not to because I can clean them as well as I need to from here. Now we're just going to take these apart, and wow, that is disgusting. You can see all of the dirt and grime and gunk that is very much so not supposed to be in this area here, not supposed to be anywhere near this mechanism, so we're going to take those off. Now I've got some clean paper towels off to the side. Again, kind of an optional thing, but I do recommend you have some kind of a clean surface just to put everything onto. Now just keep in mind, this will of course introduce some fibers into the mechanism, but as far as things go, not the end of the world. So now the actual cleaning can commence. As I said, I have some high-proof isopropyl alcohol, though it is almost out, so I may have to switch to water at some point, but it's not the end of the world. Again, Q-tips are really great just because they can get into those little nooks and crannies like the axis lock location and all those little places. Plus, this allows me to not actually have to take apart the liners, because as you can see, there's kind of a small gap in there and it'd be kind of a pain to get in there otherwise. But a handy dandy Q-tip, no problem. So I've just kind of filled this cap up from the isopropyl alcohol with it, and that just gives me a nice little reservoir to go from. Now keep in mind you are going to inadvertently remove basically all of the grease whilst doing this, so you are going to have to, whoops, sorry about that camera. So you are going to have to re-grease everything once you're done, but you should be doing that anyway every time that you take your knife apart, and even just periodically you should re-grease to make sure everything is good to go. Already we're looking a lot better. Now we're going to have to get behind that stop pin as well, so just kind of twist it up in there. Oh, you can hear, I don't know if you can catch that on the camera, but you can hear the dirt and the grit scraping every time we do that. Oh, poor girl. A lot of dirt in there recently. Now, I'm going to spare you guys the pain of watching me clean out this entire knife. It's very self-explanatory. Just get into all the little nooks and crannies you can. Clean out all of the dirt and grime and gunk that you can. Again, use a higher strength cleaner if need be. But it's self-explanatory, so I'm going to cut the video here and I will be back when I have this properly cleaned out. Alright guys, we are back. The cleaning is now basically finished. Again, rather self-explanatory, so I spared you the nitty-gritty details, but basically all we're doing here is you're moving the action back and forth, cleaning each time until it sounds nice and smooth, like there's no more grit or grime in there, and everything else gets a quick, thorough cleaning, like your washers and everything else, the blade, obviously. I now have the blade painter taped, just because you're going to have to be manipulating it a good bit, and we want to be careful with that. So now the actual reassembly begins, and this is the important part and the slightly tricky part. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my right handle scale, and I'm going to take my pivot. I'm going to push that pivot in through there so that it's flush. It's not really important now, but I like to just keep it flush there. Now, something important to note is that it is keyed, and what that means is it's not perfectly round. And I hope you guys can see this on the camera, but it is not actually perfectly round. There is a flat portion right on the top, right there we go, catching the light right there. That is very important because it can only go through one way. This liner here, there you go, also has a flat portion at the base, which means that it locks this in place, so when you're tightening it, it can only tighten or loosen and it can't just spin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it through the first liner ever so slightly, just so that it's flush. See if you guys can see that. Just so that it sits flush inside that first liner. Next thing I'm going to do, and now this is where gloves could come in handy. They're not necessary, but I do kind of recommend them because A, it's going to get messy, and B, just for sterile condition reasons, it just makes things stay a little bit cleaner. You're going to take your washers, and what you're going to do with them is grease them. You're also going to grease up the inside of the action here, everything once again, and I just noticed a little speck of dirt I missed. Just twirl through there real quick to get that out of there. So, what I like to do, because I've got this big old can of WD-40 and not really an easy way or a, neat way of doing this, all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the whole action, I'm going to wrap it up in a paper towel, and I'm going to give it a quick blast of WD-40 right inside the action. You don't need a lot. Just enough. Make sure you get both sides. There we go. Again, don't need a lot. And we're just gonna move things around a little bit. Make sure it stays nice and clean. Take our first washer. Whoops. Take our first washer and just put it right in there. And the WD-40 will actually help keep it affixed. Now we're just gonna take this, push it through. It's very difficult to do with a camera in the way, so I apologize in advance. But all you're going to do is the same thing as before. You're going to push it through that keyway. There we go. And this time you're going to try and get it through the washer as well. Again, I apologize. It's going to be difficult to do it in film, but there you go. And it threads through the washer. There you go. You can kind of see that pivot. Threads through the liner and then through that first washer. Now, here's the tricky part. The blade has to fit through here. One thing that I didn't know and stupidly didn't realize for a very long time is that it is not physically possible to get the blade in place unless you pull back the axis lock. I wish I had known this. I didn't, sadly, but now I do. But before we do anything, we're going to take our blade and our WD-40, and you don't even really need to spray it again because the paper towel is so loaded with it, but I'm going to give it another quick blast just to be safe. So we're just going to give this a quick little, probably way too much right there, but again, it's okay with grease. More is more. There you go, nicely lubed up and ready to go. So now, pull back on the axis lock like so, and that pivot is up entirely too high. So pull that through so that it's just flush with the washer. Push that in, and you're basically just going to look. And when you see it line up with the hole, with your middle finger, you're just going to push up on this, and there you have it. Blade is back on and installed. So again, with the last washer, I'm just going to wipe him down with the now greased cloth, just to make sure he's clean and only has grease on him. So very carefully, we're going to try and just squeeze him in there. And again, this is why we have that little blade stop on there, or sorry, that painter's tape on there. And you can take the back of a screw if you're careful. Personally, I prefer to take a Q-tip and just kind of force it into place. Just keep scooting it, and eventually you will get it to line up. When you do, you'll be able to just press it through. So I'm just gonna, as you can see, it's a little off center there. Just gonna line it up until I can press straight through. There we go. And again, if you pull back on this, it makes it a little bit easier. Now you can see that is all the way through and through, and it's nice and through the top. We are ready to attach the other scale, like so. Now, here's where your Loctite's going to come in, and here's where you're going to have a couple of options. Personally, like I said, I'm not going to bother Loctiting the body screws. I've never had an issue with it, so I don't really find it necessary. So I'm just going to reinstall my screws as they are currently, with the Loctite seal already broken. You're going to want to start with your nice big central screws. Where'd they go? There they are. Just to keep everything located and registered. So just going to screw that back in there. Nice and tight, but again, being careful not to strip anything, of course. Show you the comparison between the two screws here. There's a distinct difference, so you're not going to confuse them. But on a knife with, you know, slightly more similar hardware, you might want to be careful that you don't mix things up. So we're just going to screw that in. Ooh, see, you can kind of hear it slipping off there. I want to be careful I don't strip anything. So now that is relatively secure, nothing crazy. And I'm going to tack one in the back as well, because again, I have the deep carry pocket clip, and I am not able to actually install this screw unless I have that off. So we're going to install the screw first, and then get our pocket clip ready to go, whose screws were left inside of him, so he's ready to go over here. Center him back over your 3-hole design, which of course on the deep carry you are only using 2, because you can't actually reach the 3rd. Now, general rule of thumb from a mechanical engineering standpoint, and just anything standpoint, if you're trying to screw a fixture in place that has multiple screws on it, you never want to tighten down one side all the way first. You want to do a little bit on each side. It just applies even pressure, prevents you from stripping anything, and in general is just a better practice. There we go. Just make sure this is all nice and tight. Okay. Now we can go through with the last 2 body screws. Again, Loctite as you see fit. I just do not for these. Never had an issue with them backing off, and quite frankly, I don't think it's really necessary, though it is a very nice additional touch that really can't hurt to do. Just keep in mind you're going to want to scrape off the old residue, because all of these were Loctited straight from the factory. If you don't have Loctite, I have heard that super glue will work. I have no experience with that, so I'm not going to support it. I'm not sure how easy it is to break afterwards, but it is an option, so I have heard. Now, here comes the pivot screw. This is the important part here. I'm going to now remove the blade covering because we don't really need that anymore. The blade is basically fully assembled. So you take that off. And all we're going to do is we're first going to do a little test fit here. So, sorry about that. Captain Butterfingers over here wound up dropping the pivot screw. My apologies. But we are back. So, as I was saying, we're just going to do a quick little test fit here where we're going to screw it in without any Loctite. And And the reason why is because I want to get a sense for just how tight it needs to feel for it to be where I want it to be. Now the Loctite, blue Loctite, by the way, the other things are, permanent Loctite that, 200 foot-pounds of torque to get off. This is meant to be easily removed. So I'm just going to hand tighten a little bit. See, I can feel that this is a little too stiff for my liking, but there's no blade play at the moment. So let me back it off just a hair. A lot smoother. I'm okay with that level of action. Still no blade play. So I'm like, okay, that'll work. I'm going to unscrew this all the way. I know roughly what kind of tension I'm looking for on the hand, and we're ready to go. Now, we're going to clean our part a little bit with what little isopropyl alcohol we have left, because obviously adhesive and alcohol don't mix, and neither do adhesive and oil. So we want to get all of the oil off of this guy before we proceed. Again, this is where gloves can come in handy. Not necessary, but they are a nice touch. I'm just going to let this air dry for a moment. Now, this Loctite has a quoted set time of, I believe it is 10 minutes of work time before it sets up, which is plenty. Now with Loctite, a dab will do ya. So we're just going to put a little bit just on the threads like so. Come on. There we go. Whoop. This is the problem with these tubes. They overflow very easily, so I'm just going to wipe off some of that excess there because you really don't need too much. Okay, that'll do. Just going to drop that in there. Now I'm going to have to clean this whole thing again, of course, because that's just my luck. Just going to start screwing that in place. Again, a quoted 10-minute work time. I check it. It's got some blade play. I'm going to tighten her down a little bit more. Action's where I want it. Still a little bit of blade play, so we're going to tighten her down a little bit more. That might be a little too tight. So we're just going to work it manually until it loosens up a bit. Okay. A little stiff. So I'm going to back it off ever so slightly to there. That'll do. Now we let her sit. We let that Loctite set up, and we should be good to go. Just going to clean off the end of the tube here just so it doesn't, glue itself together. And there you go. And that's pretty much it. Now, you're not going to touch this. You're just going to leave it alone for, 10, 15, 20 minutes just to let it set up. So, put it on the side counter and leave it alone for a bit. Once that sets up, that pivot screw will no longer be able to back out, won't be able to loosen on you. Your blade play should stay at whatever it is now, which is hopefully none. So with that being said, that's pretty much everything you needed to know about how to break down, clean, and possibly repair your Benchmade Griptilian. Benchmade is an excellent company when it comes to things like replacement parts, replacement screws, replacement springs. So if you do damage something, it's not the end of the world. Just talk to them and they'll get back to you, generally completely free of charge. But if not, you can always send it in to them and they will repair it thanks to the Life Sharp guarantee. But, try not to damage things. Worst case, if things aren't fitting right, walk away, come back with a new mindset, and take care of things then. But anyway, I think that just about covers everything for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I hope you found it informative. As always, please like, subscribe, and comment down below if you have any questions at all. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. Keep your edges sharp and your mind sharper, and I'll see you in the next one.